This is right on top. Alright, welcome everybody to round 1 of PVC. Pre-government, we have PPF, opening opposition, we have Dodge D, closing government, we have John Cena, and closing opposition, we have Dimas. In the interest of national unity, this calls to abolish race-based political parties in Malaysia. I call on the Prime Minister to back motion as that
Ladies and gentlemen, I used to be an Indonesian national, back in 5 years ago. But then again, I had the privilege to become a Malaysian national. And for some reason, I became a Malaysian. And afterwards, I found myself to have more rights than most of my non-Malay friends, having been able to be blessed with the scholarships that only Malays can have. That I may have more opportunities to actually be in the government sector, for example, and I have generally more privilege to be as a Malaysian compared to most of my friends who are actually born in Malaysia. I think that although I am blessed with these kinds of privilege, but then again, I think sometimes that it is rather unfortunate that this condition actually exists in Malaysia, which has already 50 years of independence in same way. So we think that this is something of a remnant of an old colonial divide and conquer system, where back then it actually sort of made sense to actually have this kind of policy, whereby races are being divided based on geographical factors, based on socio-economic factors. That, for example, Malay people only work in as farmers, and the Indians, for example, back then worked in the states, and the Chinese people mostly work in the city. Right? So to that extent, right, we think that yes, given the context, right, it does make sense. Right? But when you look at it now, when you look at after 50 years of independence, we see that the situation has dramatically changed. When this form of race-based political parties, race-based system policy, for example, are only meant so long as that system is still prevailing. Right? But then again, when the system has already changed, as of now, when Malaysia has already progressed leaps and bounds, we think that it's obsolete and divisive policy, and having political parties to actually be there, to exist, to actually push those or defend those political race-based policies is downright harmful. Right? So we believe that the independent going to be to actually in the interest to actually promote or strengthen national unity, we want to abolish race-based political parties. So that means that existing race-based political parties, like AMNO, for example, should either be all-inclusive to other races or risk being disbanded. Right? So we think that the sense of the open government today is simply that political parties should reflect the interests of the community or the Malaysians in general. Right? So we don't want them to be conform to specific races and as if specific races have specific issues to tackle with. Right? We see that if the problem is poverty, then we can deal with poverty. Right? We don't have to cater to only Malays to actually lift up the poverty line of Malaysia. We don't see how it actually plays in this day and age. Right? So let's move on to the inherent problem that we have if we have race-based politics and having race-based political parties actually fight for these actively fight for these policies. Because we think that these political parties actually fight for active discrimination in terms of education or employment and other myriad why we think that it's, we think that it's actually very, very harmful to the unit. We see that currently we have, because of a minor scuffle in Loyang, right, very prominent IP trading mall in KL, for example, which is traditionally done by Chinese, the Chinese minority. You see that right now the active, the solution to that, according to the biggest reasons of the party, is not to address the issues that are in the Loyang, but to actually form another Loyang 2, which is specifically for Uyghur Malays. And we don't want that, right? Because ultimately it shows that if Malays are being are losing out in economy, the step is not actually like make them more common, but to make a special place where they can trade with each other and have economic activities in more safer, more exclusive areas. And we don't want that. It's actually very harmful setup. So this actually actively prolong stable tension that we have in Malaysia. Because ultimately how most Malaysian politicians, especially Malay politicians, actually always tap into the regard of protecting the Malay rights, not the rights of the poor, not the rights of the less privileged. Right? So, and there's also Malays having to cope with this kind of rhetoric. Right? Either they have to cope with it and stick with it, or we went to actually move on to another country. This is where we think it's bad. So basically, moving on, right? So will this actually solve the Malay problem? Right? Will this be in the best interest of the Malays? Because ultimately we don't really see how it's actually going to be harmful to Malays and also to at large. Because ultimately, when you address issues based on issues, if you're tackling poverty, you're tackling the inequality instead of only tackling Malay poverty or include poverty, we think that it will actually solve that. It will actually address the issue across the board. We think that Malay people will be helped as well. The will also be helped as well, and also the Indian Chinese people who are under the poverty line, for example, will be helped. So we think that it's more universal coming from outside. In terms of human rights, in terms of the people, especially in Sabah and Sarawak, or the people in Sarawak, we think that you are still eligible if you're under the poverty line, right? If these are addressed in a matter of issue by issue. Right? So especially when you're looking at how the regards of these politicians are used to protect the rights instead of right? Which is there is or inherently these people being left behind so that so we think that if it's more all inclusive, we think that it's actually be more beneficial to everyone. We think that it's actually better the job protecting the sector community their information.
Right, thank you, Prime Minister Borneo. Please for one opening opposition and leader opposition to the floor. Okay, here. Okay, hello everyone. I would like to start off my remarks in response to the government Prime Minister. Okay, you first started off with giving this example how Malays especially are given this unfair right, are given this special opportunities that other races and other ethnics do not have this privilege as they do. That is exactly why we need to raise this political parties. You know why? You have been talking the whole time as if there's only Malay that we need to chair political parties. There are much more than that. There are majority, there's a Chinese, there's an Indian, there's so much more, including minority races. So what happens is that you are trying to paint a picture where there's only one type of political party, and that's Malay, and they're only going to take care of Malays. But you've forgotten about Chinese take care of Chinese, Indian take care of Indian, Puja take care of Puja. So So in your case, when you say that their rights is not taken care of, it falls because their rights are taken care of, but it's just by different political parties. They still get the chance, still get the proper opportunity to go through this. And then you talk about how this race-based political parties bring harm. How? How does it bring harm? You never clarify on how it's going to hurt society as a whole, how it's going to hurt the nation. You never clarified that. So I refuse to accept the fact that when you come up here and say that this race-based political parties are harmful. And then, okay, you say that to represent Malaysia, it's not good to have this race separated. May I remind you, you are still multi-racial political parties. Okay, what you're doing here is abolishing only, you are targeting the race-based political parties. Is there any diary in this? Is there any reason to this? Does it cause harm to have a race-based political party? Okay? Does it? Why target these races? Why target this type of political parties when we still have multiracial parties, when it does not bring any sort of harm to our nation and society as a whole? Okay, so I'm going to move on to what my take. Okay, let's just say in your paragraph, you say you're going to abolish all these race-based political parties. And what's that? Is that to join politics now, you are literally forcing people of different races to fit into one group. Okay, let's just say they form one group. Okay, so what happens when all these races come from group? Because as you guys said, for 50 over years, people have been running the country this way. They are so used to this way. No? So when you mix, like for example, the Chinese political parties, they have their own way of running, and the Malays, they have their own way of running. So if you're going to put them together, and there's going to be conflict, disruption in their mechanism, how are they going to function properly? Because they do. So instead of bringing them together, you are going to divide them because of how they're going to carry out political needs, how the mechanism of the system works. But before that, yes.
Yeah, your huge assumption is that the party all get equal representation. The thing is, when one party wins, only one party has the rights, and because we separate them, only like one race will get the rights.
Yeah, okay, first of all, political parties, when you have a race, for example, let's just say the Malay is that's why they get the privilege, right? So if you are going to just let the Malay govern the countries because they keep getting this privilege, then the Chinese and Indians, they will not have power to govern the country, right? So that is already leaving their society defenses. If you're going to destroy their only that part, like their political party or their race, if you don't destroy it, what say do they have running the country? Because let's just make this a very simple, sorry, wait, let me just say, let's make this a very simple program. Let's call Malay run the country. Okay, so when you run the country as the government, right? So let's just say the other political parties like the Chinese, the Indians, they are political parties, but they do not govern the entire Malaysia, right? They will still have the say, they will still have a political view on how this works. If you are going to, okay, let's just say you destroy it, that means you're also destroying the Malays, right? The Malays group, and you're instead letting a multiracial party in charge. As I said, the ways of this. What if the way they function, the mechanism, it does not fit? Isn't that just endangering the entire country and splitting the society itself? Yes.
Yeah, your arm is really short term. It's easy for finance because it's so used to the past. The thing is, on a long-term platform, our side better help people because on a long-term they have to keep moving together and have to like work together.
Okay. So what you're saying is that you're going to force them to be united, right? So you say that this is only a short-term effect. Are you very sure this is a short-term effect? Okay, let's just say this party A is a different party B, right? They both have different separate ways of running things. It's completely different mechanisms. Do you really think they're going to like, okay, let's take half of this operation, half of the operation, and try it works? No, they are going to have conflicts, they are going to have arguments, and worst case scenario, they are going to break apart. They are going to break apart. So how do you expect to run a country based on the race itself in the political party is split? How is the society going to know what is what? This society itself is going to be split. Okay?
Yeah, how FCA, for example, is truly fighting for the rights of the Chinese, but the Chinese themselves have less right to protect the days. So they are also bringing. Explain how FCA can truly fight for the Chinese rights when the Chinese have less right to the days, even though they are
okay, this is what we're trying to set out. This whole time Malaysia has been having the privilege, right? So if you are going to put them in a multiracial political party, there won't only certain Malays in that political party get privilege instead of the other races. And that is exactly what it's going to cause split. That is exactly what it's going to cause the not just system and mechanism of the way political parties work. And you had a few earlier, for example, okay. Okay, and back to my ending part of the argument, I have talked about how this whole split system, right? So what happens to this system? What's so bad about it being run by different races? And what is going to happen is that when you put this group of politicians together because of their different races, and they have different ways of running things, right? And then because of their races itself, that encourages them to run govern the country with their own system. So when this happens, how is society going to know what is what? Because there are so many, all these different ways, all these different systems, their government is being split apart. How is this fair to society also? It is no way. Okay, thank you. Alright, thank you. Thank you, leader of opposition. Defend the case inside of the government and the problem next week. You have ladies and gentlemen, this backlash that private opposition is trying to resolve it's not really a result of people really feeling as if they describe so strongly like a whole society of ladies, like really 100% of the fights for us not telling that disintegrates what we want to do, right? The problem comes with political education in essence. We can see that a large number of society doesn't really understand the political landscape. We can find that the Malaysian political landscape is very, very different from those of other leading countries. Right? You can see that's very different from the UK, the US. You can see that in those terms, you have the divisions coming on terms of their values, not in terms of what race they're being born. You can see that sort of political, the sort of lack of political education, although it is inherent in a large part of society, can actually be tackled through the right means. But in order to have that, we should first prove to our society that your future opportunities are not limited simply by the race that you're born with. Equality or confidence in the political system comes from getting justice from the people who govern in the first place. So we talk to you about how people comfortable in status quo. Believe that racial tension currently exists in a very high state right now, but you actually have a form of stable tension. What you're actually going to do with status quo is that you're going to prolong this form of stable tension. You can see that there, and this clashes very nicely with my first point on how we don't believe a coalition of these multiracial parties can actually work. The secondly, on harms of race-based policies and on society and its effects on the economy and the economy as a whole. Right. First, we don't believe a coalition of multiracial parties can work in the first place. First, they've already told you on how you have a majority of races coming out of for example, and then you have minorities as well, right? You can see that in the end, when you have a coalition, it's always the rhetoric of the dominant party that always wins at the end of the day. That's why that's why even the Chinese don't favor MCA anymore, because MCA has always had to bow down to UMNO. Okay? You can see how there are even splits within PAS and MIDP. You can see that these people, when they are so set in their own values, when they don't even want to consider any form of compromise in these sort of things, it's very, very difficult to progress on any methods. Right? You can see that in essence, whatever form of efforts that the government or opposition, in those sense, wants to come up, the government and and PAS, when these forms of parties want to get any form of progress and unity in the community that is affected by that form of political landscape, those sort of efforts fall down. You can see government efforts such as One Malaysia, it's becoming a laughing stock, because how can exactly you call it an effort of One Malaysia when in essence you're putting one person over another simply because of the reason it's being won. You can see that these forms of ownership, the only changes that they actually bring are the changes of the majority. Whoever exactly has the loudest voice in that room essentially gets more votes than whatever of their own self-interest, their own policies that they want to bring forward. Those are the things that actually win at the end of the day, because they are the majority. That's how politics work. What we actually have to do right now is that we have to prove that as a multiracial country, equality can exist, but only when we start to allow a form of political system that is inclusive of all race, that does not discriminate you based simply on your race, right? We believe that equality doesn't exist if a person gets less opportunity simply due to their race. You can see that government efforts such as One Malaysia, this effort in trying to provide a sort of unified front that cannot put and the status quo, right? You can see that at the end of the day, politicians will always be putting down other races simply to win votes, because that's what you have in a race-based politics, right? You always have to pander to the majority of the voters in your political party, and we find that very, very powerful, because at the end of the day, you will have to find another minority group that you put all the blame to, right? You can see that in many political rallies, you have majority who believe they're really rallying to the support of favorite politicians simply because he's showing in light that it is all the problems the country came from the Chinese race, come from the Indian race. You have sort of things, when it's illegal in this sense, to be very, very harmful to a society. But on another perspective, on how exactly does it affect the economy as a whole, right? You can see that plenty of good action policies have been constructed over the years in order to put a form of support on certain races, right? You can see that at the end of the day, what you're actually doing is you're creating that sort of tension towards the other minority groups who do not get that sort of support. You can see that a growing number of people, especially growing number of people leaving the country, because at the end of the day, when they actually had to go through all those hardship simply to get any form of scholarship, to get any form of achievement, at the end of the day, they always had to go further and beyond whatever whatever Malays simply had to do in order to get to in order to get to the similar level, right? You see that they had to achieve straight A's simply to get same level of scholarship with other races. You can see that this creates a real form of dissatisfaction, because in essence you have to work more in order to receive equally the same to the person and another person. I find that to be very harmful. When these minority races are discriminated when they have actually achieved a lot for themselves. We see that there is no essence of patriotism or nationalism with them, because at the end of the day they're thinking that whatever it is that they have achieved, it didn't come from the people around them. It comes from their country. They don't owe anything to their country, so they can simply take a degree and leave, because at the end of the day, everything they have achieved, in essence, comes from their own efforts, right? You see that the problem of brain drain, something that is affecting our economy to a very large extent, it's causing also detrimental effects to our country, because we are having our brightest minds fleeing our country, not only because they're dissatisfied by our policies, but also because they fear the generations of their families here. What in essence ties them to this country, a country that does not give them equality, that does not give them the opportunities simply based on their effort, that actively discriminates them simply under the circumstances they were born. But with that, the governor of
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Finish the case of the how and how much every leader opposition. Yeah. how race-based is not as beneficial to this person. She never mentioned how it was compulsory. Why is it compulsory? There are better means to abolish it, and you can always encourage motivational practice. She never mentioned how she is going to encourage these motivational practices. How is it just if you figure their right to stand as a right? Side government also mentioned how there is a growing number of people in the country just because they do not receive some sort of scholarship to the college that they go to. Yes, the status quo Malays receive much more rights than other races. But even if you do abolish race-based political parties and combine them after all join as one, the Malays are still going to be in front. They are still going to want to lead. As you can see in most developed most construction companies, even if the director is one of different race, they would still illegally get a Malay to be the front of their name just to get the rights that the higher rights that the Malays receive, which we find very unjust. Now for a perspective of how it's a freedom of choice. A political party either works together as one and builds a stronger nation, or go against each other. There's only two possible states. It's also up to the person whether or not they want to be the party that they're fine with being in a group of people of the same race. Then the state has no right to abolish them. People of this particular have their own system of how they want to govern things. So if you invite people of other races to join in on this, would not be very likely to hold it down. Government side government also did not properly evaluate how motivational programs are more beneficial than race-based programs, other than the fact that Malays get much more rights than those are motivational strategies. They arise from problems such as conflicts that they may have and may lead to individual harms.
What is the freedom of choice for a person to join any political party irrespective of their race? Where is the freedom of choice? Is it to join any political party irrespective of their race?
Well, don't you see? In diaspora right now, there are also political parties which are multi-race. Yes, it's a freedom of choice whether or not which party they will join, but it's not their choice whether or not they want to leave party. As I have mentioned before, that sometimes the Malays will always be linked based. What is supposed to say that one not sure that a party without sure of their excuses will turn out standing as one and
Yes. Why can't we set quotas to allow for equal representation to allow all races to vote? Why can't we set quotas in a political party to allow for equal representation of races?
Well, that is not the case right now. Do you see that the government is trying to bring a change to the case right now? If that's really the case, then that would have to change right now. I don't see how that is going to I mentioned how the how that even though there would be even if there would be multi-race party affiliated or supporting the government and how freedom of choice opposition only open and closing how they are from the fact that these political parties actually exist, it shows that segregation of races actually exists. The proper understanding of score is here that citizens, we have to understand that citizens are often shaped upon law and policies that exist within the country, and they're also shaped by the political sphere. You have to understand that Malaysians often discriminate each other because of the existing example of political separate race-based parties. Here, before I get on to my main arguments of the UK, I have two remarks on the UK. First of all, they talk about freedom of choice and how these political parties can somehow create a stronger nation, people to the majority, and yeah. So they fail to realize that when your side of freedom of choice allows discrimination to exist, when you allow a group of Malays to clump up together and have a political party, that's when you allow the existing harm to actually happen, which is superiority. When you have a group of Malays that make policies or create policies to cater to the majority, which is the Malays, and we are willing to take the trade-off and see that we are going to have equal racial representation to allow equal racial representation. So my second rebuttal point today is that they came up to you with a point or sit down. Many races cannot solve a problem and whatnot. We think that is not possible. We think that when you have a lot of races that have a lot of race talk with each other, that's when you have the races to discuss about the problem and cater to all parts within Malaysia, to all the minorities that exist within Malaysia. And even if it doesn't happen, even if under the worst case scenario, it is difficult for them to actually solve a particular problem. We think that the racial representation that exists within the political sphere it shows the Malays, it shows the citizens of Malaysia that you cannot segregate each other. We have to stay united with all the minorities within Malaysia. We have to stay united with all the races within Malaysia. So we think that that's an important narrative for you to ensure that you exist within Malaysia. So I have one more substantive view in place is how it allows superiority of races to actually exist and how it is disenfranchised of the minorities, which I will explain in my second substantive of how it harms democracy as a whole. You have to understand how does population within the political sphere actually work, and you have to understand the problem understanding this work. So there's always going to be one political party that's better. For example, UMNO is equally more superior than the of the high. So we have to understand that it sends a narrative, it sends a particular narrative, but it sends a message to society that there is a superiority of races that exists within the school. So we think that there's going to be an echo chamber that discriminates other races as a whole. Because the fact that you allow these race-based political parties to exist, it sends a message to society that races should be segregated and can or are allowed to be separated. So we think that when you allow this narrative to actually exist, society then can use this example to discriminate other races. Because we have to understand that Malaysian or citizens as a whole, or the society is shaped upon the political sphere that actually exists. So we think that we think that we can actually set a narrative that you can allow discrimination to actually exist, you can allow segregation of races to actually exist. So before I get on to my second argument of how it works, any of your words.
Okay, you talk about the security of this particular race, right? That's exactly what I mean. Because even without the political parties, for example, Malaysia are still majority. So that's the majority in Malaysia, right? So if you're going
Which
to
is
have
exactly a point I'll explain to you on how it harms democracy as a whole, even under your side, when Malays are apparently superior, where apparently Malays are the majority of the state, which is why it harms democracy. So we have to understand what is democracy, and democracy is when you have a utilitarian benefit, when you can cater to the majority. Yes, we understand that is a particular race, that is a majority. But we have to also understand why this is bad when you have race-based political parties. You have to also understand how race-based political parties actually work, how political parties actually work in general. They have to be the first main goal of political party is to stay in power, is to gain power, is to win the election. So when you want to have a race-based political party, you have to analyze who are the majority of that particular party. And you're going to give benefit and you're going to change policies that cater to their needs to gain votes. So this is how a political party stays in power. So this can harm people as a whole when you actually have policies that only cater to Mudra, that only cater to Malays, and that only cater to Malays in order to win votes. So how does this in the end harm democracy? It is only empowering the 60% that exists within the majority and forgetting the minorities that exist within the particular country. It creates an unfair playground for the movement, where the millions of voters are slightly outshined, slightly outshined by the Malays, or the majority by just a mere 4%. So it does not create a fair playground as a whole. So the problem here is that it is unfair to the voters who are in the voting. For example, the Indian may seem more inferior to a Malay and such like that. So we think that the second analysis to this is actually diverts the actual problem that's happening at the status quo. So we have to understand that the problems at the status quo are discrimination that's happening within the country, discrimination that's happening within the country. So we think that when you have race-based political parties, you allow for them to keep in power, they have to continue catering to that particular race. Policies that have to be made, or policies that are race-based or that cater to one race in order for them to keep power. So when you have an integrated political party, that's when you have equal representation of all races. That is when you no longer cater to that one race. That is when you no longer have policies that only cater to one particular race. That is when you have policies that cater to all parties, but you don't have policies that just cater to one particular race. So we think that the policies the policies that we're talking about are policies that are more united and that cater to all parts of the people. So when you have more integrated political parties, it gives them an incentivization for them to create policies that cater to all the majority or to all minorities that have access. So they are going to have your party, and they are no longer going to create lazy policies that only cater to the majority of the race. So we think that it serves a more pure meritocracy in that person, where you can actually implement meritocracy, where integrated political parties are going to work harder to cater to the majority and handle the bigger problem that's happening under the school. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriel. Now we call one member of the opposition today.
greetings and salutations to members of the floor. So, as a member of the Podium Opposition Team, we would like to talk about how this House would not abolish race-based political parties in Malaysia. So, basically, we've been hearing this whole debate, this whole thing from what the government, the opening government and closing government have been talking about. And they have been talking about how having a multiracial party will be very beneficial to our country, to our citizens, yes. But somehow they fail to realize that we do have multiracial parties, and yet we have yet to see any progress in our country. So we are not sure about how sure of that statement is. And then from the closing government, one of the members has mentioned how there is superiority of races to exist and how this harms democracy. Well, we think this won't really harm democracy because democracy, the democratic system is how is that citizens, we vote for which leader we wish to lead our country. And you seem to be implying that if you are of a certain race, you would vote for that a person of the same race as you. But even if you were a Malay or if you were a Pakistan or if you're an Indian, you can still vote for other races. So we don't really see how this can harm democracy at all. Moving on to the argument for this motion, my first argument would be that it would be a violation of rights, and my second argument would be to preserve the welfare of the race. So, when we look at violation of rights, we feel that there are two sides to this. Your right as someone, as a citizen, to run a political party seems to be denied and seems to be violated because there's no policy saying that you can't run a political party. And if you look at it from a different aspect, you're violating the right of Putra or Malays. Yes, maybe it seems unfair, but then you live in this country where you were born in this country, and don't you think it's their right to have it? Of course, you don't see those motivations on the parties getting power because the only political parties that are in power right now are superior races that are control. So when your side then entrench a stronger narrative of segregation to actually exist, which may harm the people about the country. When your side then entrench a stronger narrative of segregation to actually exist within a particular country, which then harms the country even more. Not necessarily if we provide ways, we don't necessarily have to go through all this like abolishing race-based political parties. There are other ways to achieve a more fair and more better kind of system that is fair for all races. There are other ways which I will talk about later on. Next, for second argument, to preserve the welfare of the race, wouldn't it be better to have race-based political parties in the sense that we could take care of the welfare of a certain race? Like, let's say, this political party is probably an Indian-based political party, and they probably understand the needs of that race more, or the culture or anything of that race more. And obviously, if they understand them more, they would not offend them or trigger any conflict. So with this, the welfare of a certain race could be
exact quotas much racist to vote. So the Gurkha is still present on outside factors, saying that we allow all political parties to cater for all races. We allow all political parties to cater for all races without any end. We allow any Indian to go into unorganized quota to allow them full voice as related.
Sorry, I'm trying to process your question. Really sorry to get me. This is my fault. First of all, okay. Sorry. Earlier when you said there are alternatives to how we can still achieve a fairer system for all races, you think that instead of just abolishing these race-based political parties, why not just have race-based political parties, like different kinds of race-based political parties, work together and have discussion together on how to create a fair environment for everyone? Also, I forgot to mention that in my first argument in violation of rights, it is stated in the Constitution that the rights of the Malays have their own rights, and this is stated in the Constitution. No one can challenge that, and no one can say that it is unfair. So, we have a human rights. And with that, we would like to close. Thank you. Position. Drop the gate for a second.
I will try to argue all the speakers individually one by one and try to showing how outside better diagnosis model for community assessment, which I feel the government has. How I feel that the government has done that. Firstly, they will talk to you about how backlash is going to happen, how people won't come work together in the short run. The thing is, it's only a short term path, but a long term thing that people will eventually have to work together in political parties to actually do this. Okay, we are forcing them to work together when we implement this policy, and the only reason we think that we can't do it now is because we're so stuck in our ways. But like, even if there's going to be a huge argument in the political party, even if we can't do this, we feel that it's better in our side. Maybe because we allow political parties to share the blame equally. Meaning, if a political party fails, it's not the fault of that race itself. It's not the fault that that race was being selfish and just trying to cater to itself, because everybody failed together. And we feel that it's better if Malaysia moves in a way that if we fail together, and if we advance together. We feel that's a better thing to do. Next, you talk to us on how we give them a view, how we give every race a view, and we allow them to have political parties to their own race. Firstly, because what is the point of their view when they can't have that say into how our policies are being implemented, how anything is being done? The thing is, even though if I can understand that my race is being supported by some political party, but that political party always loses and I never gain any benefits. Then what's the point of them even having a voice in the first place? Their voice doesn't hold any weight at all in the political system. And now let's compare it to our system. When we allow these people to join the political party, what we're going to do is we're going to set a quota, which is already clearly established in the beginning. When we set a quota in a political party, we have to understand that it's a voting system, very simply. We need to say that if I am an Indian and there are 20 Indians and there are 20 Chinese, 20 Malays, and 20 of all the other religions in there, and all the other races over here, the thing is we have to vote for certain policy to pass through and certain policy to vote not through. So and we have to vote for a person who's going to represent our political party as a whole. So the thing is, it's going to be a political party. It's going to be focused more towards meritocracy and not towards a certain race being better than the others. That's my rebuttal towards the adults. 2 points on backlash and how it gives them a view. Next, towards the adult. Yes.
Okay, you say how this racist thing will not happen with backlash, but you see Malays are still the dominant species, even if they're in one political party in a way that they are majority citizens. So So because they're majority system, they have majority say. And because of that, they will have power inside the political party against the races.
Okay, I don't think I'm not mean when I say a quota means that if this is a political party, one thing will be Malay, one thing will be Chinese, one thing will be Indian, one thing will be like the Pakistan, this one, so forth. And these things are all going to vote for the politics, not also. And we feel that when we have a voting system where all the races can participate, on a politics, on every political level, we feel that they have to cater to every race. We couldn't even pass the political stage in the first place, so that you need to understand. Next, on like the other points, on how like the Malay will still lead, okay? How like people will maybe like put the front. First thing, we can set, like I said, we can set quotas to allow like in the political party itself for equal representation. But like even if it doesn't work, as already clearly says, equal claim is better than like treating one race and one race as a whole. And like some policies still have to go through as a whole because the certain political party needs to do so. And on top of that, what are they doing is that they're supposed to like solve this on as a whole. Okay? That's basically what TLO came up with and how like Malay is to lead. And like I feel this is completely untrue because like we can have like equal representation system. Focus. Next, on towards the extension figure. Who talk to us, we have this status quo, but it's not giving us any progress. Okay, the reason why it's status quo, we're not getting any progress is because we still have like certain political parties that cater to race. Okay? And because we still have certain political parties that cater to race, people are more likely to support those political parties, and races are more likely to support their own political parties because they themselves gain benefits as a whole. But when we like completely ban all races from all these political parties from like appealing to a certain race just because of majority wise, like people can no longer join this. And that is when like political parties where we have multiracial political parties, and it's not because people would have to vote for a certain party, and that party will be a multiracial party. Next, on like a point on how like they'll vote for the same race. How like you can vote for the race. But before that, I'll take a point for five. Okay. How we vote for the same race. The thing is like okay, next we talk about the voting right of the Bumi Putra as a whole. How like the voting right needs to be played here. First thing we need to understand is because of this right of the Bumi Putra is that like, we're currently facing social backlash support because other races are now saying that it's unfair that the Bumi Putra is being held. That's like the main reason why this debate is held, because people feel that the Bumi Putra shouldn't be like born into their certain race. They shouldn't be born into their rights. Okay? Rights should be given to an individual based on like the social contract theory or any other theory such as that, where people equally are equal under the law. The thing is, when the law kind of caters towards like the majority, is when we have all these problems, okay? And like the entire point of how like it's, no one can say it's unfair, no one can say it's unfair. Why are we having this debate? It's because the debate is the first bit is to kind of change this perception that people have towards like all these rights, how people feel like this right belongs to the Malay because they were here first or something like that. I really don't understand how this thing are. You're telling me that people can't change because of culture. They're like, what about the culture of people? What about the culture of slaves which changed over a long time? Okay, just because like something is there for a long time doesn't mean it should stay, and that's why the debate is currently having up. Next, how like they talk about how we're gonna understand their races better, and how like, and then the huge policy speaking joke from their part, how political parties from different races are going to come together and talk about how we can all help each other out. The thing is, a political party is only interested in its own political party moving up and up the social ranks, or up and up political ranks. So the thing is, when you have different political parties that represent different races, that's kind of why it fails. Okay? But their kind of like idea is similar to what our we're talking about. Where instead of saying different political parties are going to be working together, what we're saying is that we put it all under one political party. We allow many people to have different political parties where each race gets an equal representation. Meaning to say, in their case, they're talking about political parties of different races who come and talk together. We're talking about individuals of different races coming under one political party, talking together to create like a policy where these people, where everybody benefits equally from this. Next, they talk about understand their race better. I've already referred to this point where I say we can set quotas and we can make this equal. Okay? On top of that, and like when we set quotas, we allow this, I'm going to talk to you how unity is better help understand. And finally, I'm going to complete one argument from this spoken house where they talk about like brain damage, how people other countries will be like brain dead when they leave. Finally, I would just like to conclude this point is that when the country becomes brain dead, it's when they start blaming other races for the dominating party, and this will cause like a very huge harm towards a certain race because the dominating party, which is the Malay race, It's going to be constantly paid because like everybody is leaving the country, and we feel that when this happens, it creates like a huge national unity crisis, and we feel that we better solve this when we allow equal representation of the race on a political level. And for all those reasons, I'm proud to have a motion.
All right, thank you. We'll throw up the gate for opposition.
Now, so I'll present a quick summary of what the government has proposed. So the opposition thinks that the government's arguments is like economic goals. So I'll just example that one. Okay, so starting from the way to recognize the difference between social coherence and social unity. So we talked about equitability, how the use of quota would effectively give Malaysia a better future by ensuring that wealth will be distributed equally. And this is not the case, simply because one, as Malay, it is already provided by Section 4.1 of the Federal Constitution of Malaysia that the Malay or the Commitment is granted the privilege or special rights, which is granted by the Constitution, that they may have special rights. And as you are born in Malaysia, if you accept your identity as a citizen of Malaysia, first, simply cannot challenge that the Constitution is. In other words, you cannot be judged solely on the ground, whereas you also have to accept that you are a citizen of Malaysia, which is to recognize that the Malays and the middle class, they have far right than the others. Yeah, your best case scenario, the structural discrimination still happens when you have exclusive parties based on race, pushing race-specific rhetoric and policies. How is that good, or how is that better than what? So basically, the best thing that you can come from your bed is that there is still a structural discrimination where there are different parties fighting for each individual basis. How is that better than our more inclusive model? You don't mention that the races fight against each other. As you can see, each races want their rights or interest to be protected. And as such, why is it that we need to maintain the racial-based political party? It's because it's to ensure that Malaysia will really move forward instead of just progressing one against another. What is the place? So recall the reason why the racial strike of May 13, 1969. Before that, this reason why it happened. They happened not because of the number. The people just don't like it. You want people, I don't want people. I don't have. The word gender is not of the number itself per se. Rather, it's about the distribution of wealth inside. Yes. So it would be common sense to have, let's say, Malay, because Malay constitute about like 60% of the population in Malaysia. And if we look at that population, Malay is the race that actually have more wealth. But at the contrary, what happened in the reality in the context of Malaysia is that Chinese have accumulated more wealth than Malays. That's why the government proposed the new economic policy to actually grant this Malay to ensure that they have equal playing field compete with Chinese. So this is kind of a formative action which is supported by the government as mentioned by the quota system. And we'll tell you why the quota is not feasible. The most important reason being how do you decide how you allocate the quota so it will be happily accepted by every people. Would it be fair, for example, if let's say Malay got 60%, then I allocate 60% of wealth, Malay. Then how do you then establish a incentive system? Then the other Chinese, we got no incentive to continue to live in Malaysia. This eventually leads to the development. For sure, this is exactly what happened in Indonesia during the racial fight. Chinese are very why? Because they don't have any appropriate action to ensure that incentive is kept in balance with the appropriate action. Yes, you are.
If socioeconomic status of each race is equalized, will this structural discrimination be abolished?
So you're saying is every person get the same wealth distributed the same amount of with the racial combination be abolished. Okay. So if let's say the system is that so the status quo right now, you must recognize that the Chinese is circulated more well as compared to Malay, and that's why we need to provide affirmative action to provide Malay unfair advantage. So that's why they can compete equally. And why is that the political party is that racial based? Because they need to ensure that such a affirmative action is having place. So that let's say should such a political divide not happen at all. So the party does not have any race that will contact this kind of particular race, and as such, so the voice of minority will be completely drowned by the majority instead, because there is no formal institution to contact the more less competitive race. Yes, you're right. So we have talked about why quota is something to do. We talked about why government failures are failed to recognize the federal constitution, and then why is it to better countries to market for our case. So and with the people take use. And also the government mentioned about the social contract. So what happened in the social contract is actually the social contract actually granted the existence of the multi-racial party. Because this is why, let's say I am the original owner of this land. That's supposed to be I come here first. Then after that other races come here by the policy of the British come here. Okay, so I have this privilege as the Muslim tribe, and that's why it's straight out. I give you the right to come here to our country. So in return, I give the privilege to make the identity to learn your language. So it's only fair for me to ask like given that privilege under such a system. With that
thank you.
Keeping debate on the
You just leave your things and come back here.
that a lot of the things that opening talked about were more on racial situation than what political parties about. So like the discharge of verdicts are never doing that. So they said that existing political parties are not inclusive, therefore we decide it and we have basis of the media. Fine. So then they said now we want to keep the issue by issue basis. One of the things like that. Firstly, that is not verified. Secondly, they talk about how there's an active discrimination to employment and education discrimination. Fine. Fraud pension, how non-racial can be called with racial employment. So now, your verdict is telling why would we have a multi-racial group? All these problems we talked about, we can resolve. No outcomes, right? We talk about how it is beneficial to everybody. Also, no outcomes. What are the benefits? How do you improve community? There's no form of clear outcome of the work. Then moving on to the set the same thing. But this time, she was very defensive, completely ignored what I was saying. Said, no, that will not happen, this is not going to happen, but never can compare the situation of the possible backlash that will happen, right? Then, so the same thing, prolonged tension, more progression, all that. And it's not only about brain drain and all this. I think brain drain is something that can be debated, but now, no explanation, no analysis on what is going to happen, right? So, the background speech started like a racial discrimination speech that rather than why we don't need political parties anymore at this time. So I can't do that first of all. But going back to all, they asked really good questions. Even though their answer is not everyone, they asked really good questions. Firstly, they talk about how even if we have multiracial parties, the Malays will still be dominant because they are the majority race. Therefore, minorities and Chinese and Indians will be, that's why people the IC and MIC has to exist because they need to be someone apart for minority rights. So if we abolish these political parties, minorities will have no longer have voice anymore because even if we have multiracial party, the Malays will still be the majority, right? And you talk about how that now you are forcing structural change. That means you're forcing all these nations to work together, but they can't work together because every race has their own interests. Therefore, this political party has people from every race. And it's not going to happen when multi-race parties come in, right? And this is something that we do. Because now you talk about how when multi-racial political parties form, and then there are majority of race, of course, the majority of race, right? You leave the Indian and Chinese on your own. And the fact that they are already so disenfranchised, why are you still not there? Why do you still beat them on platform to close out? So there's zero coalition. And nothing, no one rebuffed that at all, even though the government. Right? They were very,
very big about how
they were able to say, and of course, it's not even about
it's hard.
you right? So let's talk about how they were very like this. One couple, they are not a big problem. It is that look, even in all the situation, the race are still away. There's still a majority. Like how they talk about like how these people will work together and push for policy that is in interest of everyone. You see, even if there's quota within a political party, when you want to approve a policy, of course the policy has to be implemented on some ways. For example, a policy to change education system. Maybe the Chinese will be more for it, like yes, we have more progressive education system because they know that the Chinese can handle it. So then so that's why all this has been set more and none of them have got it. I can't give form to CEO the phone material, but you have to do like we talked about how you allocate
That is actually what is going on.
Yeah, so everyone can agree that you have to yeah, I think like what people should
This should solve somehow.
yeah. So it said that and we make part section says that you do need a conversation and I'm sorry you do it. I felt like the numbers were good, but based on the period, it was something that all have to be about. So I feel like do all space based on very simple, but they asked the right question, they gave the right material, and those material stood till the end of the day. And because no one wanted to engage in that, no one wanted to take them down. And a lot of things that they don't supposed to has already like literally started that cannot. So I gave first awards. I gave second to Susu. I gave third to yeah. So that's not because I can't accept a very defensive case in which you don't engage with the whole. Like they made a mistake saying oh this is all I think it's looking, you know, that all doesn't sound get to therefore I don't engage them. But a lot of things accept is actually makes a lot of sense. Like look, because the lack of professionalization for the debate, everyone wants to talk about how to improve
it works in Malaysia. I was really waiting for that.
Yeah, I want to talk about example is who better or Garuda. That Malays will remain majority, the products will work, which is very important out for that. Minorities who lose their voice and they will drop out in the majority. So I think that in itself is enough to make it work. Because the case was simple, like no one wants to justify what for. No one talk about integration. They want to talk about solution, very negative ways. So yeah, that's it. You can sorry, okay. I think you can have your opinion.
I don't see any outcome or any discrimination.
It's actually not result. The other further is to just to tell us that only parties need to exist. So you need to understand the leadership way. We understand what kind of burden is that this needs to discharge and whether they can go to it. So like for example, government discharge the kind of burden but never fully believe it. No all discharge not of the burden, but they fulfill it and they analyze the afterlife question about the countries. So like it's not about how much you say, it's what you say. Firstly, I'm going to generally talk about